Hello and welcome to this video on question 3 on paper 1. Now before you even start answering question 3, you must make sure that you know the story, and that's why it's so important that you spend 10-15 minutes of the exam reading through the extract and making sure that you know the story very well, because the examiners is looking for what you understand about the deeper meaning of the story and not just things that you can quickly find by skimming and scanning the story. So it's really important that you spend good quality time annotating the story and making sure that you understand what's really going on. So here's what the question will look like. The question doesn't change year after year, but what does change is the story. And so you'll get this question, but it will be for a different story. So we need to get used to this kind of style of question and how to respond to it. So if we look, it gets you to think, it asks you to think about the whole story that you've got in front of you, and it will tell you something about where it is in the bigger story, because usually the extracts are from a short story, but they might be from the beginning, middle or end of it. So it gives you an idea. And then the question is here: how has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? So this question isn't about language, it's about structure. And that's where you've got to make the clear difference. Question 3 is about structure. Question 2 is about language. So you need to make structure points. Now, the problem comes with the question is this little phrase here: to interest you as a reader. Now, we want you to talk about why has the writer structured the story in the way that they have. The problem is this little phrase here fools people, and it's a problematic phrase. So be careful with this, because it does trick people, because really the examiner doesn't want you to talk about what's interesting for you as a reader, because often what happens is students will go, oh, the writer structures it this way to make it interesting for the reader, and this is interesting for the reader. We need to avoid that phrase. So that's what you need to be really careful with this question. So what's the examiner looking for? So the examiner with this question is looking to see that you understand what's really going on in this story. So have you understood the subtext? They're checking to see if you can comment on the structure. They're also checking to see if you can explain why. And let's go back to this point over here. Saying it interests the reader isn't explaining why the writer has structured something. And it's checking to see if you understand how a reader reacts to the text. So you can see that phrase again, interest the reader, doesn't really show that. So you really need to be careful about this little phrase here, interest the reader. And we're going to talk you through how you can deal with this properly. So the question looks like that. And so what we're going to talk about now is how to structure a response to the question. Now, we're going to talk to you about the structure. So really, any story extract that you're given, you can kind of break into 3 sections: the beginning, the ending, and the stuff in the middle. And so what we need to think about for this question is what's going on in the beginning, what's going on in the middle, and what's going on at the end. Now, to help you with that, there are 6 things that writers tend to focus on, and these are all about what a writer does. So a writer could either at any point in the story be talking about a character, or describing the character, or showing us something about the character. Or the writer could be talking about the setting, where the story is happening. Or the writer could be focusing on the weather. or the writer could be focusing on an object, or the writer could be focusing on an action, something that's happening. Now that could be an object, or it could be a person doing something. Or the writer could focus on dialogue. And so these different focuses or foci are the things that writers can do. So for example, in this story that we've got here, it focuses on objects at the beginning. And then we have in the middle a bit about setting. And then right at the end, we have some dialogue. And so starting off there with our writing, we can say, well, in the opening, the writer focuses on an object, violets, some flowers. In the middle, the writer describes what it's like to be on the bus. At the end, we have some dialogue between some characters. So there are the things that we're looking for. So the big question we've got to think about is, why has the writer structured it in this way? So this is about thinking about reasons. And what we need to do is we need to be careful of that second part of the question about interesting the reader. We're looking for something a bit more than interest the reader. And that's why phrases like these are really, really bad phrases, because they don't really explain what the writer is doing. So the writer describes flowers in the opening to hook the reader, or to make the reader read on, to make the reader ask questions. They're not really good phrases, and we want you to avoid these phrases when writing about the structure. So we need to think about how we can talk about the structure and say something meaningful. So the best way to do that is to think of these two things. What is the writer trying to make us understand, or what is the writer trying to make us feel? Those are two particular things that we need to think about when talking about it. So for example, if we look at the opening of this story, it features some flowers. Okay, so this character has got quite a sad life, and so what the writer does is it focuses on objects, the flowers. Why does the writer do that? Well, really, the writer focuses on flowers to make us understand how sad and lonely this character is. She buys flowers to cheer herself up and to make her life a little bit better. How do we feel about that? Well, we kind of feel sad for her, because clearly she's not very happy if she's got to buy flowers to cheer herself up. And so there is us talking about the structure. The writer has used an object, flowers, to make us understand this and to make us feel this. And so what we're doing is we're talking about that subtext. What is under the surface? So we're showing that we really, really know the story and what's going on here. So that's what this question is getting you to do. Now, there are other phrases we can use instead of understand and feel. We can kind of sort of say things like, well, the object foreshadows something later on, or it mirrors something, which means copying something later on. It makes us reveal, or it highlights something to us. And those are words that you can use in your writing and in your explanation when talking about things. Now, we're going to go through just very quickly why writers focus on particular things at different points in a story. Now, our thing we've got to work on is when we get the story, we've got to think about what the focus is. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the things and some of the reasons why we have particular focus at a particular point in the story. So the first thing is why do writers zoom in on a character and describe the character? Well, That's generally make us identify with a character or make us see things from their perspective or understand their emotions, which is what we've got in this extract here. Well, why do writers use setting? Well, setting is used to create mood and to show us the situation. So for example, in this story here, we've got a bus and a miserable bus. What does it do? It creates the mood that Rosabel's life is miserable. And so it helps create the mood. Weather is another thing that helps. So in this extract, it's raining, which clearly reflects the misery that Rosabel is experiencing in her life. So it helps set the tone and also show us a character's state of mind. Objects, well, we've used that from the flowers. They actually can be clues about a character's personality, or they can symbolize something about the character. So for example, the flowers symbolize how Rosabel wants to make her life better, about that improving and how nice things make her feel better. Actions help us understand something about a character or raise a symbol of something else that's going on in the story. Dialogue helps us understand character. So you can see all those different things have a bit of a purpose. And so we're not expecting you to remember every single one of those things and what they do, but it's to have that thought process that when you see something in the story, you can think about, oh, why has the writer done that? What is the writer trying to make me understand? What is the writer trying to make me feel? Now, squeals is our way for structuring this response. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to spot something. Now, unlike question 2, which is about language, what you're going to spot is something about the structure. Now, usually it will be something to do with the focus. So here we've got the opening focuses on objects such as violets. Again, you're going to have to use a quote. So Rosabel bought a bunch of violets, and you need to use that as evidence to prove your point. Then we're going to talk about the effect. So again, with our squeals, we're going to talk about the effect of this. By focusing on the violets, what does it make us feel? So here we see the object contrasts with the misery and plainness of her life. The flowers are beautiful, positive, yet fragile. So we can see that mixture of moods, that the violet actually contrasts with the miserable life that Rosabel has at the moment. Then we need to explain it. And remember, in English, it's your explanation that gets the higher marks, not what you've spotted. So it isn't about mentioning every single thing you can spot about the structure. It's about why is the writer focused on that particular thing. So here we've got Rosabel does not enjoy a life. It is plain and dull like the egg. By focusing on the flowers, the writer is making us understand how Rosabel wants to make her life better. Now look at that word understand. So we're talking about the reasons why, and we're explaining why has the writer chosen violets. Well, it's to make us understand how Rosabel wants to make her life better. Then we've got link it. So how can we link this to the rest of the story? Well, this links to the job she has. She sells hats which are designed to make someone look better. Her buying the flowers echoes what people do with the hats. They're trying to make their life and themselves better. And then the bigger, and this is the more high level skill, the symbolizing. So what do the violets symbolize? Well, the violets symbolize how short this joy can be. Flowers like happiness fade, and never last long. And so you can see that the structure is very much the structure of question 2. We spot something, we use a quote to evidence it, we explain why the writer has focused on that thing, we link it to the rest of the story, and we think about the deeper meaning, the symbolism. Now remember, these are skills, and these are the things you need to include in your paragraph, but they can be at any point in the paragraph. They do not need to be in this particular order. So there's the basics of our paragraph. And if we can see that the things that are not in bold, that would get you about 3 out of 8 marks. Your ability to spot something, use a quote, and talk about the effect of it. The text in bold is what's going to get you beyond those 3 marks. Now remember, 4 out of 8 marks is working at a grade 4, roughly, on this question itself. So we need to be working on developing an explanation. Now, with this paper, it's not about the number of points that gets you the higher marks. What gets you the higher marks are the depth of explanation. And so we're going to look at how we can develop your paragraphs so that you explain things further. So here's a sentence, and by adding this sentence to the paragraph, we actually improve and develop the explanation. So by starting with this object, we see how depressing a life is, and we are hoping that something will happen to change this. Now, what this little sentence does is thinks about the whole, the big picture. And so by talking about this, starting with this object, which is a good little phrase, okay, we are hoping that something will happen to change this. This is talking about the beginning and the rest of the story. Now, one little thing to think about with this question when talking about the structure is thinking about what is the writer's master plan. What are they doing? So for example, by starting with the object, we're hoping that her sad life is going to be improved. That's what we're hoping, and that's why the writer has focused on the flowers, because we're seeing how depressing her life is. We're hoping by the end of this story that her life is somehow better. That's what we expect. We expect stories to be about changing and things changing. So if we see somebody miserable at the beginning, we expect them to be happy by the end. Well, why has the writer done that? Well, the writer wants us to empathise with Rosabelle so that we feel protective when she is treated badly later. So that key word there, empathise, that's why the writer is doing this. Again, look, we're given reasons, and we're not just giving to make it seem interesting, we're giving a clear reason why. Why does the writer do this? 1, so we hope that something will change. 2, so we empathise, and so when somebody's treating her badly, we feel angry for that other person, and so we're connecting. So that's the reason why the writer's written it this way and focused, so we're connected with the character itself. So you can see how one focus can add so much by adding different reasons to our paragraph. Another thing, the writer shows us how depressing Rosabelle's life is, so that when the woman with the red hair appears later, we understand why she's so jealous. So again, we've got that explanation, and again we're thinking about the master picture. What master plan? What's going on here? What's really going on in this story? So the key thing is we understand that she is jealous. That's what's going on here. And again, another sentence we can add here, and perhaps is a really good phrase, because it shows that you're kind of really doing some thinking and some exploration of what's going on. Perhaps the whole story is a moment of discovery, and Rosabelle is discovering how her life can be better. So going back to the idea of a master plan, that's what we can do. So thinking about the master plan. So you can see how our squeals paragraph is there, but with these different reasons added to this paragraph, we're expanding and we're developing and we're exploring and explaining. That's what we've got to do to get better at this question. Now, we've gone through quite a few things there. The key thing is to do that thinking and that planning. If you take your time thinking about why do you think the writer focused on dialogue in the middle, that will help you get better marks, because it's the explanation that's key in this question. You can spot hundreds of interesting things about the structure of the story, but if you're not explaining why the writer has structured it in that way, then you aren't answering the question. And so explanation is key. Your planning will help you develop your explanation. And often where students do badly on this question is because they haven't explained. They haven't thought, why has the writer focused on this at this particular point in the story? Why are they started with setting? What do they want us to understand? What do they want us to feel? So those two things. If you're stuck when looking at the story and you don't know what to talk about, then think about words like zoom, focus, and shift. What is the writer zooming on? What are they focusing on? What is the focus? We know focus can change all the time. So what is the focus? And another word to think about is shift. Is there a shift? So that could be a change in mood, or it can be a shift between inside, outside, or it could be a shift between characters. Why has the writer done that? Okay, so zoom, focus and shift are nice little words to talk about, and they are that terminology that helps you talk about the structure. When writing, always think about the start and the end of the story extract that you've got. There will be something interesting about the way that the story is structured, something at the start and something at the end. And usually the start and the end are linked together. Usually there is a cycle, or there is something that's repeated at the beginning and at the end. The other thing to think about in the structure of the story is there will be a change in mood. So for example, the one that we've looked at, there's a change from going from miserable and depressing to kind of being jealous. That's a shift in mood there. So being miserable to being jealous, there's a change from being depressed to angry. Ensure you use the word because in your explanation. And it's quite simple. Often students overcomplicate the reading answers because they're worried about how your writing should be written. And really, examiners are not reading your writing and checking for spelling, punctuation and grammar. What they want is they want to get to the ideas. So you need to just focus on explaining. So using the word because is brilliant, because what it does is it forces you to explain. So the writer starts by focusing on the setting because. Why does he do that? Because he wants us to understand this, because he wants us to feel this. Use words to like reveal, remind, emphasis and initial when explaining points. So the writer reveals this so that we understand this. The writer reminds us how sad Rosabelle is so that we feel sorry for her. And those can help you develop your explanation. Think about the grand design. What is the big picture? What's going on? Often students just look at a tiny little bit of a detail and they don't link it. It's a bit like a spider's web. That's what the writer does. This little bit at the start actually links to this later on and this bit there. And so try and build those connections and see those connections across the text and talk about it. So actually, you know, the writer is talking about flowers here, but actually the flowers link later on to the hats because she's bought a nice fancy hat. So look for the bigger picture. How does everything link or connect together? If you're struggling in a paragraph to expand points, then use these phrases. Furthermore, this could be also the writer is suggesting. Now we're going to look at some true and false statements, and we want you to decide for yourself if they're true or false. So take this opportunity to pause the video and just decide which ones of these are true and write them down. And then as soon as you're ready, press play on the video. Okay, so let's go through the answers then. So number one, terminology is more important than explanation in this question. That's false. Explanation is key. Yes, you do need to use terms, but your explanation is more important than the terminology. Number two, you must use a quotation in your answer. That is correct. You must in every paragraph ideally, and if you can, use more than one quotation in a paragraph. Number three, you need to aim for 4 paragraphs for responding to this question. That's false. Like question 2, you only need to write 2 paragraphs. You just need detailed paragraphs. Number 4, you must show a good understanding of the subtext for this question. That's true. Okay, the subtext, remember, that is about the deeper meaning. What's really going on in this story? The deeper meaning. Number 5, the examiner wants you to think of the big master plan in the story. That is true. Okay, and we want you to think about how everything connects to each other. Number 6, you will be rewarded for talking about language features like similes and metaphors. That is false. You will not get any marks for talking about any language devices in this question. If you talk about language devices, you will not get a mark for that device. So you should be talking about the structure. Number 7, you should use phrases like the reader wants to read on and the reader asks a question in your response. False. The things that you should be talking about is what does it make the reader understand and what does it make the reader feel. Number 8, you can get higher marks for using fancy terms to describe the structure. That's false. In fact, fancy terms don't actually get you any more marks. What gets you the higher marks is explanation. The more detailed the explanation, the higher the marks. It's the quality of the explanation that gets you the marks, not fancy terms. So here are all the true ones. Do watch the video again, and this video will be available for the final exam to help you revise for question 3. Thank you.